Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Migicovsky. I'm the CEO and founder of Pebble, and I'm extremely happy to be here. It's my second time in Osaka, and it's been amazing. It's a little bit cold, but I'm from Canada originally, so I think I'll be able to live. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about a small product that I helped make, which is called Pebble. It's a smartwatch. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about the process of starting a hardware company. I am an engineer. I studied systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo in Canada. This is me in high school. Starting from a young age, I always loved to build things. This is an interesting invention that I had to make. So when you're 6.5 feet tall, almost 2 meters tall, most of the normal chairs do not work too well for you. So I had to create this accessory that I would carry around during high school and put on the back of chairs so that I could get the correct upper back support. So a small example of, I guess, hacking something. And since this is Hack Osaka, I figured it would be appropriate. I do like to build. I do like to build things. I've been building things for a long time since I started with Lego as a small kid and a big kid, and of course problem solving. And I find that while doing a startup, most of what I do is problem solving and building things. Currently, I'm working on Pebble, which is a smartwatch. It works with iPhone and Android smartphones. It talks to them by Bluetooth, so it's similar to a Bluetooth headset, except on your wrist. With Pebble, you can see emails, text messages, calls, and apps on your watch. But it didn't start out as Pebble. It actually started 6 years before as something called Impulse. I'd like to tell the story of how I started working on this 6 years ago when I was in university, all the way to now. And I think two of the most important common threads of my time doing this startup can be reflected in two fairly simple messages that seem quite intuitive and obvious, but I know that as someone working on a startup, sometimes the most obvious is the hardest to see. Two of the main things that I've seen, one is making something that people want. This is one of the credos of one of my mentors, Paul Graham, who started the Y Combinator program. He loves to say this because at the end of the day, a startup needs to make something that people want to use, that people love using. And so if you're looking for a metric or a way to judge your success while doing your startup, think about this. Do people like what you make? Do they love what you make? And are you able to detect that? The second main truism that has been fairly constant throughout the 6 years of working on the startup has been, don't let your company die. Almost by definition, if you are still around and still working on your company, it's been successful. But at the low points, at the hard points throughout your startup career, this is something that I needed to remember quite a bit. But let's jump back 6 years ago to my dorm room. I was actually on an exchange. I was studying industrial design at TU Delft in the Netherlands. Coincidentally, the same university that my grandfather studied at 70 years ago. So it was a little bit of a full circle for our family, but I was back. And this is in the dorm room. I was creating the very first prototype for what would later become Pebble. So you might be able to recognize the screen. I don't know if anyone remembers the Nokia 3310 phone, which was one of the most common phones during the early 2000s. So I ripped the screen out of my phone. Well, I guess I got an extra phone. Ripped the screen out, connected it with an Arduino, which is a very open, hackable, embedded microcontroller platform, attached them together, and along with a bit of duct tape and some of those zap straps, I was able to make the first prototype for a smartwatch. Moving from there, I went back to finish engineering at the University of Waterloo and decided to continue working on this project as my fourth year engineering project. And one of the very cool things about Waterloo is that engineering students always work on projects. It's not just courses, it's not just lectures. There's a very large emphasis on building things, testing them, and actually building something that people can use. So in my 4th year of engineering, I was already working on the second prototype for the watch. I went to school at Waterloo, which some people might know is the headquarters for BlackBerry. Now, BlackBerry is interesting. You might remember BlackBerry. They were very popular. They had keyboards, and they were one of the first smartphones that became quite big. So the very first prototype of the watch actually worked exclusively with BlackBerry. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, might not have been the best decision. But back in 2008, iPhone was just beginning, Android was still in its infancy, and BlackBerry was actually the biggest smartphone platform at the time. So this is also a bit of a reflection for me, seeing the whole process. I can't believe how bad my SolidWorks skills were 6 years ago, but this is the very first computer rendering of the product. This is also a good lesson why hardware companies should always hire an industrial designer, because they help make things look way more beautiful than just a plain old engineer. They also can help bring a little bit more color and design than folded over steel that I would attach to my wrist. Things improved drastically when we added an industrial designer to our team. These are some of the first sketches that we made of Impulse. Now, Impulse is the name of the watch that worked with BlackBerry smartphones. This is the first working prototype of Impulse. You can see that the case of the watch is actually 3D printed rather than metal. And so we moved from 3D printing to CNC milled metal and a much better 3D render after we had hired the industrial designer. I'd also like to say a little bit about how hardware startups come to life. Many people may have preconceived notions of hardware startups requiring a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. But I'm here to say that it may not be as difficult as you may imagine. For me, starting the company was almost out of necessity. I really wanted to build this product, something that would bring emails, text messages, notifications onto my wrist. But I researched and I looked in the market, and there was absolutely nothing that was suitable. And so as much as I love the fact that it did become a company, it started out as a single product, a problem that I wanted to solve. And I think some of the best hardware ideas that you've seen recently have been derived from very similar feelings. So some of the early stages of the design process eventually led into our very first manufacturing. Manufacturing did not occur at our office, which was located in the garage behind the house that I lived at. We had just graduated from the University of Waterloo, but for some reason our key cards still worked at all the labs. So we were able to enter the labs and start using them as our assembly line. It was much cleaner than our garage, so it was better for assembling. We built the first 50 or so Impulse watches in this process, where you see circuit boards that we had made at a very small manufacturing center, and then the cases for the watch. This is actually the step where you press the circuit board into a little fixture, and the software is loaded on the watch for the very first time. This was a fun process. It eventually led to an entire legion of high school students that we hired to become the first assembly line workers at Pebble, still working out of whatever space we could find. This was definitely one of the more fun moments of the entire process. The very first moment when we actually created a product that we could sell to people. And I think that process of actually putting together a product for the very first time and selling it to someone pushed us past the initial kind of friction point of having an idea, using it internally, to actually getting feedback from external parties. Our very first customer, of course, was my dad, who was an avid Impulse user. The first users of our product would give us an immense amount of feedback every day. So we sold the first 50, and then every day from that period forward, we would receive emails in the morning, in the evening, at 2 o'clock in the morning, with comments, feedback, questions, complaints. And I think that early stage of the process, having a very close connection to our customer, was extremely important because the lessons we learned from those early customers have kind of sculpted the product and eventually led to what we built later. So this is the next phase. So after our high school students building assembly line, high school student run assembly line, we moved to a very small manufacturer that was close to our office, and they helped us build the first 1,000 watches. And this was a very big change from making 50 of something to making 1,000 of something. And we learned a lot in the process. One of the things that we learned at this step was the importance of having an ecosystem of products and apps that could run on top of your hardware. So as a hardware manufacturer, we had a very small team. We only had 3 or 4 people in the entire company at this point. But one very smart thing that we did is we published a software developer kit that enabled third-party developers to write apps that worked on top of Impulse, the first watch. Now, at the time, it could have been considered a small distraction. You know, most of our users were not programmers. They were not interested in hacking their watch. But a small percentage were. And we took a risk, we took a chance, and we spent a month or 2 working on a software development kit. And eventually, we found out that that would be the ability to write apps and to run apps on top of the hardware was one of the best decisions that we ever made. But I'd love to take a quick moment and try to convince you to start or work at a hardware company. I know that in Silicon Valley and Osaka and across the world, there are mainly software companies, mainly software startups. But I personally would love to help convince more and more people to work on hardware projects. Me personally, I love the feeling of waking up in the morning and putting on a piece of electronics that I helped make. I feel like that physical connection to something that I helped create is very cool, and it's almost like a one-of-a-kind feeling. While building your hardware startup, it's important not to ignore too many of the lessons that our fellows in software startup land have already learned, like the idea of a minimum viable product. This comes from the lean startup school of thought, where you should always be thinking about building the least amount or the smallest potential product that can serve your users or solve a problem. So I'd say that with Impulse, our first watch, we definitely tried to build, even though we didn't know it at the time, the minimum possible product. We also asked people to pay us money, which back in 2009 was somewhat of a new concept, asking people to pay money before they've received their product. Nowadays, with Kickstarter and crowdfunding, it's much more common. But back then, we were actually selling an alpha product, even earlier than beta, for $150. And as long as we provided a high level of service, we felt that it would be okay to do that. Another important thing while building a hardware startup is to remember not to optimize for various things that are, in the end, not very important. So at the beginning, we made the mistake of trying to bring our cost of goods down to be very small. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out the cheapest components that might save $1 or $2 off of the bill of materials. What I learned after 2 years of working on Impulse before we actually got to the point where we could start selling it was that the BOM cost does not really matter. At the end of the day, if it costs $50 or $70 to make your product, the most important thing is to get to the point where you can sell it and start getting feedback from your potential customers. The other thing is not to worry too much about the extra stuff around the product. You should worry about the product and what it does for your users. But so, for example, manufacturing, we didn't go out and we didn't fly to China and start creating an entire manufacturing line. We just built it ourselves using whatever means we had available. The other thing that struck us later in our process was the idea of building a company rather than just a product. With the addition of the software developer kit, we created an ecosystem that other people could help build on top of. And that helped move us from just being a single product to being more of an ecosystem of devices and apps that can help solve different problems. And finally, things like what you're doing today, meeting other people that are interested in building hardware, was one of the most important lessons that I learned. When I moved from Canada down to Silicon Valley, one of the things that I appreciated most about the Valley was the ease at which people talked and shared ideas. There were no real barriers between companies. Even though you may think that another company may be a competitor, one of the really cool things about the Valley was just conversations that would happen over coffee or meeting up for a beer and realizing that other companies are sharing some of the same problems that you're facing. And especially on hardware, I feel like it's extremely important to share problems and share successes among different companies. So that's my little side note of trying to convince people to build hardware companies. But I think our story continues after the impulse phase of the product. In 2012, we began working on what would become Pebble. It was a watch that finally worked with Android and iPhones. It took us a few years, but we realized that this iPhone thing was really taking off, and we decided to invest more effort in figuring out how we could get a smartwatch to work with iPhone and Android. Unfortunately, at the time, in 2011 and 2012, there were not many investors that were interested in investing in hardware. Now, this is a problem that I think is shared all over the world, the idea that it is very difficult to raise money from investors. I personally have tried multiple times throughout my career to raise money, and only after Kickstarter was I able to see success. So the reason why we went on Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding platform, was because we were completely unable to raise money from venture capitalists. Even being located in Silicon Valley, even having the support of a very good network of friends and mentors, no one was really interested in taking a chance and investing with us. So we had a product, we had it designed, and we knew that we wanted to build it. So we took it directly to customers around the world. We launched on Kickstarter. We posted a video, we posted photos, we posted a story about the product that we were working on. And then we asked people if they were interested in supporting the project. Turns out they were, and within 30 days, we had raised over $10 million from 85,000 people around the world, all interested in buying a Pebble smartwatch. Now, this was actually before we had created Pebble. It was still somewhat of an idea. Obviously, we had already created many versions of Impulse before that, but we never made Pebble. So we took a lot of the lessons that we had learned with our first watch and plugged it into the design of the watch. This is an interesting graph. This is the progression of our investment on Kickstarter over the span of 37 days. I added this graph mainly to show the importance of getting out to the press and talking about your product. As you can see here, one of the things that I think we did a really good job at during our Kickstarter campaign was talking to reporters, talking to bloggers, and sharing our story around the world. You can actually see every little bump in traffic, and this is dollars pledged to our Kickstarter project, was an article that we got on a local newspaper or on a larger newspaper or on a blog around the world. So it's just a reminder that there's always a benefit to talking about your idea, getting out there, and my personal best trick with press and with bloggers is to talk to reporters that you respect. I know that each and every one of you loves reading the tech blogs on the internet, and sometimes there's a blog that's specifically catered towards your industry. I know that there's 3D printer blogs, there's Internet of Things blogs, there's now even smartwatch blogs. And some of the best people to help talk about your story are the bloggers that write articles about the space. So if you're reading a blog and you follow them on your RSS feeder, that's probably the best place to start when you're looking for press around your startup. So after this, after our launch on Kickstarter, we put our heads down and we focused on manufacturing. This time, we did fly to Asia. We flew to Shenzhen, and we found a factory that would be interested in helping us bring Pebble to life. We were only around, we had around 10 employees at the time, but we knew it would be very important for one of our employees to be in China at the factory practically 24/7. So three of us spent around 6 months bouncing back and forth from Silicon Valley to China. We spent a lot of time with George and our manufacturing team in China. I even had the pleasure of spending Christmas in Dongguan, China. It was pretty interesting. I'd never had lobster for Christmas dinner before. This is our Pebble production line where we manufacture pebbles. And what's interesting about this whole process is that it was completely new for me. I had never worked at a company that made consumer electronics before. And I think the learning that we made throughout the first part, the impulse part of the story, was critical. Even though we had never manufactured in tens of thousands of units, the lessons that we learned about the mechanics of the watch, of ergonomics, and of software helped us navigate through some of the bumpy waters during this larger manufacturing phase. But this was an amazing moment. This was the very first red Pebble that I took off the assembly line, I think on December 27th, 2012. I was sitting on the assembly line watching Pebbles go by, and I said, I don't have a red one, and I grabbed it, and this was my watch for about 12 months during 2013 until I got my new Pebble Steel. But like I said before, right at the beginning, one of the best parts about working on a hardware startup is the idea that you physically helped create something. And working on wearables and devices that are around your house, Internet of Things, means you always have that presence with you at all times. Today, Pebble has hundreds of thousands of users around the world. We organize meetups and we organize events that enable developers who are building Pebble apps to get together. We even hosted hundreds of people who use Pebble and create apps for Pebble at our office in Palo Alto, California recently. And today, Pebble is one of the only open and hackable wearable platforms out there. There's millions of apps on the platform and tens of thousands of developers who are creating apps. Now, there's one important note, and while I'm happy to be here in Japan, in Osaka, Pebble does not yet support Japanese characters. It will soon, and as soon as it does, I'd love to encourage as many people as possible to bring Pebble to the Japanese market. There's a very large opportunity to create new and interesting apps on a wearable platform. And Pebble, I'm slightly biased, but I think it's one of the most easiest ways to get started. Even though I just told the whole story of creating a hardware platform from scratch, with Pebble, it brings the ability to create a wearable device or a wearable app to developers in a very easy manner. You can actually build an entire app for Pebble in just JavaScript that works with both iPhone and Android phones. So it's super easy to get started with, and like I said before, very shortly we'll be able to support Japanese character sets. So with that, I'm happy to say that was kind of the short and sweet story about Pebble from beginning to end, or beginning to this point at least. I don't know if I'll be able to take questions right now, but I know that I'll be speaking later on a panel, and I'll be here the whole day. I would love to chat with as many people as possible who are interested in working on hardware and working on Internet of Things. As I mentioned before, I personally love to share the knowledge and experiences and anecdotes that I've gone through over a very interesting 6 years, and anything I can do to help share some of the experiences would be great. But yes, thank you very much.